All right, this is going to be a short video on making an elevation map and a web application for it in the ArcGIS environment. Now, as I stated earlier in class, we're going to begin by naming this, and that's the first thing I always want to do. Is we're going to open up a new map here using the new map option, and then I'm going to save it right away as, in this case, what I'd like you to save it as your last name, Livingston in my case, underscore topo, and in this case we're going to put in app. Okay, and again, in terms of tags, let's put in topography. That seems like a good ad, and we're going to click save. Now in this case, unlike the last brief exercise, one of the nice things about ArcGIS Online is that in terms of data, we have this wonderful resource called Living Atlas Layers. And so we're going to be using that today to look at the different aspects of digital elevation models as they relate to the United States and really to the world. So I'm going to click on the Living Atlas layer. And today what I'd simply like you to do is type in DEM, remember Digital Elevation Model, click enter. And what we're going to do is be adding a number of different layers. Even though all of these layers actually could be found in the terrain layer, we're going to add them in a little different way. So I'm going to click on add, and we're going to add them as a layer. So the terrain layer, we're going to add the slope layer, we're going to add the aspect layer, and what I'd also like you to add is the hillshade layer. We're going to talk about all these in just a minute. And once you've added those four, again, hillshade, aspect, slope, and then the terrain basic one, click on close. Now you'll notice, by the way, right here, this subscriber content, that's something that means the data actually has value, if you will. We'll get into that in another lecture. So we're going to click close. Now you'll notice what I'd like to do first is turn off all of the layers except terrain. And the first thing I want you to notice is that you don't see a whole lot. In fact, most of the United States looks rather dark. One of the problems with the default here is that our elevation data, if we were to look at the legend right now, is a stretch from a low value of -450 meters to a high of 8,700 meters. And the reason for that is that if we look at the entire world, we see some values that are really quite high. Obviously the Himalayas have the highest values, but a lot of the world falls into this kind of low categories, rather dark. And so one of the things we want to do, and I'm going to focus again on the United States, is we want to look at how we can modify that. Now the first thing we're going to do, again, I'm in the legend option here. I'm going to go back to content, and under terrain, what I'd like you to do is click on the options and then the image display. And so for raster data, this is the way that we're going to work with this. Click on the image display. And in terms of our stretch, what I'd like it to do is a minimum maximum. And what I want is a dynamic range adjustment. What this means is that the stretch, in other words, from the minimum to the maximum value, is going to be for the extent of pixels within the view. So you'll notice when I click on that, and now my color ramp, I'm going to change, by the way, I don't particularly like this one. I'm going to use a topographic color ramp, and I'm going to use this more intense one here. And so when I hit apply now, you're going to notice that that kind of comes all the way across here. Okay. Now, the other thing that we can do, we're going to go back into this, and one of the things that we might want to do is think about what we're going to do with the water out here. And again, there are ways that we could mask that normally. And that's one of the reasons that many times that people will use this kind of grayscale one, is because when we apply that, then the oceans come out as black in this case rather than that light blue. But again, we're going to come back in, and you'll notice that every time that I move in here, the tonations change as the range of pixels change. So I'm going to zoom in on our slippery rock area, and here we go. And now you'll notice that again we have nice gradations here, and we can see across slippery rock. And again, this is based on the Pennsylvania LiDAR data. It's the LiDAR DEM, so it's very good quality data. Now, once we're done with that, and I've kind of zoomed in on this, what I want to do next is go through the different layers briefly. So again, we've got our basic elevation. I'm just going to click on a location. And you'll notice that I have an elevation of 391.2 meters. Our pixel size at this scale is 3 meters. Now I'm going to zoom in, and you're going to notice some really nice quality data here. And as I've zoomed in, okay, we're going to see that we can see all sorts of different things happening here. It's very nice, high quality data. If I click on the hillshade for this area, you'll notice now that if I go across these, we're going to kind of click through this, different types of data that are present are going to give me different size pixels. Okay? And so again, it's always important to understand what your pixels are and what they're showing you. And also you'll notice it'll show you where they're coming from. All right, so again, here's my hillshade. I'm going to go back through these. My terrain, my slope, and again, I'm going to turn off this. You'll notice that the slope, we're going to look at our legend here, our slope map is essentially a RGB layer instead of a meaningful one. We'll get to that our next time around. But in our content area, we have terrain slope map, terrain aspect map. Oh, so bright there. And again, remember that aspect, in terms of our legend, when we do this in a normal data set, we're going to actually see this as the orientation of each facet. But here again, it's just the RGB. And we can change that. And then we lastly have our hillshade. So each of these represents our different aspects, and some of them have meaningful legends, at least in the default, some of them don't. But the most important thing we're going to do next is I want my hillshade to be somewhat transparent. So I'm going to go to hillshade here. We're going to set our transparency, and in this case I want it to be moderately transparent so that it works to improve the other layer. So now what I've done is I've made it the transparency layer for the hillshade moderate, and so now I'm going to click off of that. So again, my hillshade transparency is about 60%. So now anytime that I add that, you'll notice that it's transparent, but something below it still has those shadows. So again, here's my nice topographic map now with my hillshade. Or I can now have my slope map, again, more accented with that. And then lastly, of course, I can have my terrain. And now that terrain has a much more pronounced feel to it. Again, that hillshade really adds to it. So again, each of these, we're going to want these layers to be opaque, and we're going to want our hillshade to be transparent. Okay? Now, of course, we can do that the other way. We could make our hillshade opaque, and I'm going to show you what the implications of that are. If my hillshade is opaque, and I bring that in terms of its order, okay, moving it down, every time that I do that, so now I've got hillshade below aspect, and now I can make my aspect moderately transparent. You'll notice that those colors become more subdued. We still see that shadow, and the shadow is rather pronounced, but the colors of the aspect become more muted. So you have to get in to decide which of those is a better way of doing it. And so in this case, what I'm going to choose is my hillshade again. I'm going to bring that up. That's going to be at the top, and I'm going to make that transparent. Okay, I'm going to make it about 60% transparent, and so we'll be able to see that transparency in the other layers. Okay, so again, here's our hillshade and without the hillshade. Okay, now last thing we're going to be doing in this one. Okay, and so we're going to now share the map. So again, I'm going to click on share, and we're going to just do this again. I'm going to click on everyone and OK, and then I'm going to click on create web app, and I'm going to select the basic viewer and create web app. All that's fine. I'm going to click done. And what it's doing is processing that to create our application. You'll notice this is a little thumbnail of it. For this map, please note, click on subscriber content, click each of these on. That's going to consume a little bit of our data, but that's okay for this. We want to do that. And again, in terms of themes, I would like this to be green. You may choose any color you want or leave it in the default blue. In terms of our options, the most important thing is that I'd like to make sure that you turn on the legend option and the measure option. Those are going to be very important. Once that's done, you may also want to add some other options, but for right now that's enough for us. And now click Save. And in this case, I'm going to now click on Launch. You're going to see what this looks like. And there's our web application. Now remember, this is in fact a web application, and here is its URL. The URL, we can now look here and we'll see our layers. And in this case, remember, I'm going to turn off my aspect and my slope. Now I see this nice map. I can also show my legend, and those are my legends right there. Again, not terribly meaningful here, but now I can zoom in and zoom out, and we see our nice data set across the country. So that's making a web application. Remember, this is our URL. You can send that to anybody and they can take a look at it. All right, we'll talk to you next time.